school caretaker. Girls, Jessica and Holly, would know you, and they saw you on the front doorstep. What went on?
I don't know the girls. They just came across and asked how Miss Carr was, as she used to teach them at St Andrews. I just said she weren't very good, as she hadn't got the job. And they just says, please tell her that we're very sorry. And off the walk in the direction of the library over there.
After an extensive search, finally, the team found something concrete. Inside a yellow bin was a black bag, and after the bag was removed, the charred and cut-up remains of 2 red football shirts were found at the bottom.
A 28-year-old man and a 25-year-old woman have been arrested. The 28-year-old man has been arrested for the murder and abduction of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman.
Can evil hide right in the spotlight? In 2002, Ian Huntley did exactly that, playing the concerned neighbor on national TV while the bodies of 2 10-year-old girls were actively decomposing. 20 years later, when his estranged daughter came forward, haunted by the cruel taunt that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, we are forced to look back. How does a man with a long string of misconduct allegations end up getting a job as a school caretaker? The core question is, where exactly did the system break down to let a monster slip through the cracks? Everything I'm about to share with you is based on my own deep dive into court records, official police reports, and first-hand accounts. So, why did I decide to dig into this specific case? For me, it all started with a single photograph. If you were around in 2002, or if you've ever fallen down a true crime rabbit hole, you definitely know the one I'm talking about. 2 10-year-old girls standing side by side, beaming at the camera in matching red Manchester United football shirts with Beckham printed on the back. It's a snapshot of pure innocent joy. But the thing is, that photo would go on to haunt an entire nation. It became the defining image of one of the darkest and most heartbreaking chapters in British criminal history. The girls in that picture were Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. They lived in Soham, a quiet, tight-knit rural town in Cambridgeshire, where people looked out for each other and everyone practically knew everyone. Holly and Jessica were inseparable. They were the kind of best friends who perfectly balanced each other out. Holly was a little bit quieter, more introverted, while Jessica was the outgoing one, full of energy and completely extroverted. They complemented each other perfectly and did everything together. And then we get to the timeline. Sunday, August 4th, 2002. It was a sweltering hot summer day. Jessica had just gotten back from a 2-week family vacation, so the girls were well overdue for a catch-up. They spent the afternoon at a family barbecue at Holly's house, playing games and listening to music. Exactly 5:04 p.m., the girls asked Holly's mom to take a picture of them wearing those matching red shirts. What happened next is the part that every parent has nightmares about. A little after 6:15 p.m., the girls quietly left the house. They didn't mention it to anyone, but investigators later pieced together that they were likely just heading out to buy some sweets from a local shop. By 8 p.m., their parents realized they were no longer in the house. They initially thought the girls were just playing upstairs, but the room was empty. That's when the panic set in. In a peaceful town like Soham, 10-year-olds don't just vanish into thin air. By 10 p.m., they were officially reported missing, and the police immediately got involved. That night, the entire town of Soham stayed awake, searching the dark streets and fields, hoping to find them. A few days into the agonizing search, the parents went on national television, desperately pleading for help. Watching those old news clips is absolutely gut-wrenching. Through tears, Holly's mother said something that hit hard.
Afternoon, both Holly's and Jessica's parents joined the police in making a desperate appeal for help.
I don't allow her up the street on her own at all. At all. We don't allow her.
No.
Anywhere.
No.
On her own.
So they'd both be frightened.
Jessica doesn't like the dark. We love them so much. We just want them to. Just. Anyone who's got children must know what we're going through.
Which tells us something crucial. These girls were strictly taught not to talk to strangers. Because of that, it begs a massive question. Drop a comment below if they wouldn't wander off with a stranger. Do you think this points directly to someone they already knew and trusted? Meanwhile, The search for Holly and Jessica had exploded into the biggest manhunt the UK had ever seen. The entire country was collectively holding its breath. We are talking about a massive, unprecedented operation. Over 400 police officers pulled from multiple forces, helicopters circling the skies, and sniffer dogs scouring the local fields, woods, and drains. The story completely took over the news cycle, becoming so huge that even David Beckham, the girls' absolute idol, went on national television to make a desperate public plea for their safe return. Everyone was praying for a miracle, but here's the thing. While the police were scrambling and the families were living through an unimaginable nightmare, someone else was actively stepping right into the spotlight, and that someone was Ian Huntley, the local school caretaker. At this point, you would normally expect a guilty person to lay low, right? To hide in the shadows, keep their mouth shut, and avoid drawing any unwanted attention. But not Huntley. He was unusually, almost weirdly eager to help. He inserted himself directly into the investigation. Even more brazenly, he started doing interviews with major broadcasting networks like Sky News and the BBC, proudly presenting himself as the crucial last witness to see the girls alive. And this is important because you have to look at exactly how he handled himself on camera. In one infamous interview with Sky News reporter Jeremy Thompson, standing right outside his own front door, Huntley looked completely unfazed. Thompson asked him directly about the girls' demeanor, asking, "Did they seem happy?" Without missing a single beat, Huntley replied,
"How do we know they were here at 6:15? Well, we have an eyewitness. Ian Huntley here is a familiar figure. Evening, Ian. You're the school caretaker. The girls, Jessica and Holly, would know you, and they saw you on the front doorstep. What went on?"
Well, I don't know the girls. I stood on the front doorstep grooming my dog down. She'd run away and come back a bit of a mess. They just came across and asked how Miss Carr was, as she used to teach them at St Andrews. I just said she weren't very good, as she hadn't got the job. And they just says, please tell her that we're very sorry. And off they walked in the direction of the library over there.
What I found was that his behavior here is a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Huntley was confidently painting a completely fake detailed scenario to throw the public and the police off his scent. He even had the sheer audacity to express deep fake remorse on camera, saying he kept replaying that brief conversation in his head, wishing he had said something different to keep them at his house just a little bit longer. It was the perfect fabricated script of a concerned neighbor, delivered while the girls were already dead. He was actively manipulating the media to control the flow of information and steer the narrative away from his own front door. The problem is, when you watch that footage knowing what he had just done, it makes your blood run cold. While the whole world was weeping for these two little girls, this guy was standing there seemingly enjoying the intense media attention and soaking up his role as the tragic hero of the hour. Which brings me to this: do you think Huntley was actually getting a sick thrill out of playing the important witness right under the police's noses? Or was this just a calculated survival tactic to avoid suspicion? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because seeing how incredibly calm and collected his face looked on that broadcast is something I still can't wrap my head around. And then, we have to talk about Maxine Carr. At this point in the investigation, Huntley wasn't the only one stepping in front of the cameras. His girlfriend, Maxine, also decided to do her own television interviews. The thing is, Maxine wasn't just some random neighbor in the community. She was a teaching assistant at Holly and Jessica's primary school, and the girls absolutely adored her. In one particular interview, Maxine pulled out a handmade card that Holly had given her just weeks prior. Holding it up for the reporter, she said,
"How did she think they'd react if, for example, a man pulled up in a car and said, 'Get in, girls, I'll give you a lift'?" And the first odd thing was that Ian Huntley answered the question in a kind of emotional, upset, excitable way. And he said, well, Holly would get into the car, I think, but Jessica wouldn't. She'd put up a fight, she'd go mad. And the first thing that struck me there was, well, how could he know that? He's the caretaker of another school they don't go to. I mean, if you asked how my daughter might react to it, I might have a rough idea how my daughter might react, but Roy wouldn't have any idea. So the first thing that struck me as strange was, well, how could he know? So then...
And this is important. Did you catch that? She said, she was just lovely. The problem is, she was referring to the girls in the past tense. At this exact moment in the timeline, Holly and Jessica were officially still just missing children. The police hadn't found any bodies, and the entire country was still praying they would come safely home. So why did Maxine already speak like they were gone? which tells us she likely knew exactly what had happened behind closed doors. Before we dive into the bizarre moves Huntley was making behind the scenes, if you are invested in this journey and want to see more deep dives into cases like this, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. It truly helps me keep digging into these investigations and bringing these stories to light. Now, what happened next with Huntley himself is just as disturbing. While the police were conducting their routine door-to-door inquiries in the neighborhood, Huntley casually leaned against a police cruiser and asked an officer, completely out of nowhere, how long does DNA stay around for? Just let that sink in for a second. On top of that, detectives noticed 3 prominent fresh scratches on his face. His excuse? He calmly claimed he got them from roughhousing with his dog. Meanwhile, a sharp journalist who had interviewed Huntley noticed some massive red flags. Huntley flat out refused to have his picture taken by the press, which makes zero sense for a guy who was so incredibly eager to do televised interviews. Furthermore, his story about washing his big hairy dog in the front yard when the girls walked by just didn't add up. Any parent knows that no 10-year-old walks past a wet dog on a sunny summer day without stopping to pet it, or at least mentioning it. This is the part I couldn't get past. Despite all these glaring inconsistencies, the slip-ups, and the bizarre behavior, the police literally set up their main investigative command center right inside the very school where Huntley worked as a caretaker. How on earth did they do that without suspecting anything? Because of that, Huntley had front row access to the entire investigation. So, I have to ask you, do you think Maxine's use of the past tense was just a nervous, accidental mistake under pressure? Or was it a cold, undeniable sign of her guilt? Let me know your read on her down in the comments. Meanwhile, as Huntley was busy playing the concerned caretaker on national television, his desperate need for attention completely backfired. Because his face was now plastered all over every major news network, people back in his hometown of Grimsby were watching, and they immediately recognized him. That's when the phone lines at the local newspapers started ringing off the hook. People were calling in, and the horrifying truth about Ian Huntley's past finally began to spill out. What I found was absolutely staggering. It turns out, Huntley was hiding a massive, incredibly dark history. We are talking about no fewer than 9 previous allegations of rape, indecent assault, and predatory offenses against underage girls. He had a clear documented pattern of predatory behavior. The problem is, you have to ask yourself, how on earth does a man with that kind of terrifying background walk right into a job as a school caretaker, with keys to the buildings and direct access to young children? The thing is, the system completely and utterly failed. Because none of those previous accusations had ever actually made it to a criminal trial, the local police force had simply wiped his intelligence files clean. They deleted his records. On paper, Ian Huntley was a ghost. His background check came back completely clean. From there, he actively manipulated the system even further. At one point, to outrun his toxic reputation in his hometown, he actually changed his last name to Nixon. He moved away, altered his identity, and eventually relocated to Soham with Maxine to start over, completely undetected by the school's incredibly weak background checks. And this is important, this massive loophole effectively cost 2 little girls their lives. I want to ask you guys about this directly. When it comes to protecting children, do you think police should be legally required to keep records of severe allegations, even if they don't lead to a conviction? Or do you think that violates a person's civil rights? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is the exact system failure that allowed a monster to slip right through the front door. At the same time, the people from his past didn't just expose his predatory behavior, they exposed the terrifying reality of his life behind closed doors. Former neighbors started speaking out about his relationship with Maxine Carr, and the picture they painted was horrifying. Huntley wasn't just a predator, he was a violently vicious partner. Neighbors recounted hearing Maxine screaming through the walls and witnessing him brutally beating her in public. It wasn't a loving partnership, it was an incredibly toxic relationship built entirely on fear and his need for absolute, terrifying control. Which means, when we look at Maxine Carr and her decision to lie to the police to give him an alibi, we have to look at it through the lens of that deep psychological manipulation. But does living in terror excuse covering up the murder of 2 innocent children? At this point, investigators knew they had to look much closer at Ian Huntley. The lead detective, Chris Stevenson, ordered a second incredibly thorough search of the school grounds. The reason this matters is that during the initial search, Huntley himself had actually volunteered to show the officers around. He had actively guided them, conveniently steering them away from certain areas. But this time, the police weren't taking his word for it. What happened next finally broke the case wide open. While searching the school's waste area, officers looked inside a large yellow bin. Stuffed down at the very bottom, hidden inside a black garbage bag, they found something that made the lead detective literally break down in tears. When he got the call, it was the charred, intentionally cut up remains of 2 red Manchester United football shirts. The killer had tried to destroy them, but there was absolutely no doubt who those shirts belonged to. He had hidden the most damning piece of evidence right there at his own workplace. I have to ask you guys about this. Why do you think killers so often keep evidence right under their own noses? Do you think it's pure arrogance, believing they are smarter than the police? Or is it just blind panic? Drop your theory in the comments, because hiding those shirts at the school where he worked is a mind-boggling decision. Meanwhile, out in the countryside, the desperate search for the girls came to a crashing, devastating halt. On August 17, 2002, exactly 13 days after Holly and Jessica went missing, a local groundskeeper was walking near an overgrown irrigation ditch by the RAF Lakenheath base, about 12 miles away from Soham. He had noticed a foul odor a few days prior and finally came back with a couple of friends to check it out. That's when the absolute worst-case scenario became a reality. The bodies of Holly and Jessica were discovered lying side by side in a shallow ditch. The details are horrific. The killer hadn't just dumped them. He had actively tried to set their bodies on fire to completely destroy any forensic evidence. Fortunately, the fire hadn't fully taken, but the damage and decomposition were severe. The entire nation's heart broke in that exact moment. Because of the discovery of the bodies and the charred shirts, the police officially moved in. Ian Huntley was arrested for murder. And this is important. You have to look at Huntley's immediate reaction once he was placed in custody. He was granted one phone call from the police station, and he chose to call his mother. According to his family, his mom picked up the phone, felt the absolute dread in her gut, and asked him completely point blank, "Did you do it?" He didn't deny it. He didn't claim he was being framed or cry for a lawyer. Instead, there was a long, heavy pause on the line, and then he simply replied, "I love you, Mom." In other words, it was a chilling, indirect confession. The confident, media-loving neighbor act was completely over. The monster had been caught. But the incredibly twisted story he was about to tell the jury in court would push the boundaries of reality even further. When the trial finally began at the Old Bailey Courthouse in late 2003, Ian Huntley knew he was completely backed into a corner. The forensic evidence against him, from the charred shirts to the chalk dust on his car, was totally overwhelming. So he decided to completely change his story. He actually took the stand in his own defense and presented a scenario so bizarre and absurd that it is genuinely hard to comprehend. He looked the jury in the eye and claimed that the deaths of Holly and Jessica were nothing more than a terrible freak accident. According to his new twisted narrative, the girls were walking past his house when Holly suddenly got a nosebleed. Huntley claimed he simply invited them inside to help clean her up and guided them to the bathroom. He stated that the bathtub was full of water, and then he said he slipped on the wet floor, accidentally knocking Holly into the tub, where she instantly drowned. But it gets even worse. Huntley claimed that witnessing this, Jessica understandably started screaming in sheer panic. To stop her from crying out, he said he put his hand over her mouth and accidentally suffocated her while trying to quiet her down. I need you to pause and think about that for a second. He actually wanted a jury to believe that 2 healthy, vibrant 10-year-old girls accidentally died in his bathroom within seconds of each other in 2 completely separate freak accidents. Drop a comment below. Do you think there is even a fraction of a percent of truth to this nosebleed story? Or was he just throwing a desperate, calculated Hail Mary to avoid a double murder charge? The thing is, the prosecution and the forensic experts completely tore his ridiculous story to shreds. Medical experts testify that you cannot simply suffocate a struggling child by accident. It requires sustained, intentional, and significant force. What happened next in the courtroom was a brutal dismantling of his lies. The prosecution made it incredibly clear this was likely a predatory-driven crime that quickly spiraled out of control. And this is important, they highlighted the absolute cold-blooded ruthlessness of his actions. When he attacked the first girl, the second girl immediately became a witness, which means in his ruthless, selfish mind, she had to die too. He actively chose to murder the second child solely to silence her and cover his tracks. At this point, the jury had heard more than enough. In December 2003, Ian Huntley was found guilty of 2 counts of murder. The judge handed him a double life sentence with a minimum term of 40 years, noting there was little to no hope of him ever being released. Meanwhile, Maxine Carr also faced the consequences of her actions. While she wasn't present for the brutal murders, she had actively and continuously lied to the police to provide a fake alibi for a killer. Because of that, she was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison for perverting the course of justice.
A poem for Holly, entitled Soam's Rose. Your right to grow, to mature and to play, so cruelly denied in a sinister way. Attentive and caring, a parent's delight, but so young at heart, needing comfort at night. The garden is quiet, the house is too, but pausing for a moment, we can still scent you. Your trusting nature and desire to please all allow us, your family, to remain walking tall. Our memories, now shared with the nation's hearts, small crumbs of comfort, now it is time to part. We will never forget you. Heaven's gain, as it knows, is simply you, Holly, our beautiful Soam Rose.
But the story doesn't just end with a guilty verdict and a prison sentence. What happened next fundamentally changed the entire country. Because of this horrific failure in the system, the government launched the Bichard Inquiry. The thing is, this investigation exposed exactly how a monster was able to get a job at a school, leading to a massive sweeping overhaul of the UK's background check system, creating what is now known as the strict DBS check. In other words, the tragic loss of Holly and Jessica exposed a fatal loophole, and closing it has undoubtedly saved thousands of other children from predators slipping through the cracks over the years. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of Huntley's evil have continued to destroy lives behind the scenes. Fast forward 20 years, and his biological daughter Samantha Bryan bravely stepped into the public eye. She didn't even find out who her real father was until she was 14 years old, stumbling across a blurred photo online. She is absolutely nothing like him, yet the dark ghost of what her father did haunts her every single day. She has had to live with cruel whispers from strangers and the nightmare of his legacy. Recently, she even wrote to him in prison, begging him to finally tell the truth so the families can have some semblance of peace. What struck me here was the sheer, unimaginable resilience of the victims' families. Despite enduring a public trauma and a pain that most of us can't even fathom, they have somehow found a way to keep going, to live their lives, and to honor their beautiful girls. But the problem is, will this case ever truly be closed in their hearts? How do you ever fully move on when the man who destroyed your world refuses to give you the final pieces of the puzzle? If you appreciate these deep dives and want to join me on more true crime journeys, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow so we can keep uncovering these stories together. So, here we are today. Ian Huntley remains securely locked away behind bars, and he still stubbornly refuses to confess exactly what happened in those final, terrifying minutes. Which means we may never truly understand the full, unvarnished truth of what occurred inside 5 College Close. On that sunny Sunday afternoon, the case is legally closed, but the psychological wounds are still wide open. And that brings me to my final question for you guys, because it's something that still heavily divides people today. What do you really think about Maxine Carr's role in all of this? Was she just another manipulated, terrified victim trapped by a vicious man? Or was she a cold, calculated accomplice who willingly covered up the murder of 2 little girls she used to teach? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.